Okay, welcome, Robyn. It is so nice to meet you and see your face.
Yes, thank you so much for having
Yeah,
me. And
of
it is
course.
lovely to, be like almost face to face with someone. It's as
I
good as it
know.
gets these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Well, and it's funny because I've been following you for a while. I mean on social media,
Hmm.
all of your information and then on Instagram. And so it's just funny to like actually be talking to you and be like, "Oh, this isn't a recording. This is a real person."
No, this is real. It's a real serve and return, and how fun.
So funny. So anyway, well, I'm excited to hear it. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself first before we jump in?
Sure.
Okay.
So I've been a licensed therapist for, my whole adult life, really. Like I finished graduate school at 24 and thought I had, enough wisdom to start being a therapist for
Hmm.
kids with really big behaviors, which I didn't. But, do we ever? We just kind
Right.
of figure
You
it out
start
along the
somewhere.
way, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Got to start somewhere. So I've done a lot of things in, my early career. I've worked child welfare, I worked for
Okay.
CPS. I was a medical social worker for a while, and I've worked inpatient, I've worked residential, and ultimately moved into just kind of traditional outpatient mental
Hmm.
health work, and have really always had an area of specialization of working with kids with, I would now say, complex trauma,
Hmm.
vulnerable nervous systems. Way back then, we were mostly talking about these kids having rad. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so those are always been like the kids that I've been
Okay.
just so passionate about and
Hmm.
wanted to serve. So I was, getting the kids who kind of none of the other therapists really knew what to do with.
Sure.
And frankly, I didn't either.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm pretty tenacious. And I just was like, well, I'm going to have to figure this out, I
Hmm.
guess,
Yeah.
because nobody left to refer these kids to.
Hmm.
So I did that for about 15 years. My family and I worked in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And yep, I grew up
It's
in,
warm there.
in, pardon?
It's warm there.
It is hot there.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, we loved living in Austin. I'm not from there, moved there. Like when I finished graduate school, we moved to Austin and loved our lives there, loved our community there, loved the families I worked with. And there just came a point where we decided we didn't want to live in Austin anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Austin is a wonderful place to live, but it's very crowded and very expensive.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
about 4 years ago now, we relocated to outside Grand Rapids, Michigan, which
Okay. That is
is a big move.
not hot.
It's not hot here. It is still winter.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I grew up here, so we were coming home, but what we were really looking for was just a total lifestyle change. Like we
Hmm.
wanted something that was quieter and
Hmm.
calmer and not as fast paced and honestly like cheaper
Hmm.
than when we lived in Austin. Austin always felt very busy and
Hmm.
um it was so hard to live there, like, the traffic was hard, everything cost
Mm.
so much money, it was just like life
Yeah.
was just, like, 3 clicks harder than we
Yeah.
wanted it to be.
Sure.
So, I closed my private practice, and we moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and at the time, I was doing a lot of teaching and training of both parents and professionals, right? There's just not near enough professionals who know how to support these kids and their
Right.
families.
Yep.
So I've always done a lot of teaching and training of other professionals as well as just directly, working with parents and teaching and training, and really had to kind of bolster that side of my work in order to be able to move
Hmm.
because I couldn't move my private practice. So I was really all in teaching, training, traveling, speaking, and then the pandemic happened.
Yeah. Man.
So, yeah. So I thought I would eventually work with kids and families here in Michigan like I did in Austin. But I did not want to start a private practice in the middle of a pandemic
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons. We're
Yeah.
also a vulnerable household. And so we were very, very quarantined during the
Okay.
pandemic. And so I just kept doing what I was doing with teaching and training, but just, of course, I just shifted all virtually
Yeah.
and then get really creative, right? Like the pandemic didn't make anything better for the families we work with.
Mm-mm.
It made things in many circumstances worse. They were so
Worse. Yeah.
isolated and
Mhm.
um, had to get really creative. Like, well, what am I going to do? How are we going to help these
Yeah.
people? Because they still really need a lot of help. Like the
Yeah.
pandemic didn't stop what they need.
Hmm.
And so I've really shifted then since that time doing support and education and community building on a little bit of a broader scope. So now I have an online membership and community for, we say, parents of kids with vulnerable nervous systems and big
Hmm.
baffling behaviors.
Yeah. I
Most
love that.
of,
Hmm.
yeah, it kind of happened by accident, but people really latched on
Yeah.
to the
Because it
idea of
makes
baffling
sense.
behaviors.
It
Yeah.
totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Ironically enough, it
Yeah.
does. So most of the parents that I serve are parents of kids who have a history of trauma. Though certainly not all, I was really starting to hear from folks like, hey, what you're offering to folks in
Hmm.
this trauma community actually applies to really all kids,
Yeah.
but especially kids with these intense behaviors, maybe
Hmm.
just with a different kind of origin to their behaviors.
Hmm.
So it's still primarily serve families whose kids have a history of trauma, but there's more and more families entering the community all the time who don't
Yeah.
necessarily resonate with the label trauma,
Sure.
but certainly them and their kids have some nervous system vulnerability.
Sure.
And then I have a teaching and training program for professionals. I still just can't look away from the fact that
Hmm.
there's not enough, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's one of the things I hear most from the parents in the
Hmm.
community that I'm serving, right? Is that there's nobody to help them.
Yeah.
And some of these kids need like therapy,
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
can't offer in this virtual community. So I have a program now that teaches and trains, actually not therapists. It's a parent coaching, essentially a parent coaching program that welcomes professionals from any background.
Hmm.
So I have therapists and play therapists and educators and occupational therapists and then also parents, like parents
Yeah.
who feel like they've um, kind of stepped out of daily crisis, maybe.
Sure. Hmm.
Maybe now
Yep.
it's just every other day.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so, and now they feel ready to, use like the skills that they've gained to help other families.
Hmm.
So that's one of my favorite parts about the program that I run is that it is multidisciplinary. I feel really passionately that we need to take like what's traditionally been held really tightly by the mental health community
Hmm.
and bring it to more people. There's just simply not enough people in the mental health world to serve
Yeah.
all the people who need help. And so I want to bring those skills to other people. I
Yeah.
have a podcast, I have a book coming out. So yeah,
You're just kind of doing all the things.
it's so fun. I'm so
Yeah.
lucky. I really, really feel that. I'm so lucky.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, so why did you get into this work? Like why initially when you were younger did you say, I think
Mhm,
I'm going to go to college for this? And
mhm.
we know how it kind of evolved, but what started it for you?
I've always wanted to work with the kids that I would say baffled other people. I wouldn't have said that back then. That's not a word I would have used, but I very clearly when I was in high school still picked up books from the High School Media Center written by
Mhm.
Tori Hayden, who
Okay.
is a psychologist, special educator, a memoirist,
Okay.
and she wrote books about her experience serving really intense kids, mostly actually in an educational setting. She was largely like a teacher in a
Okay.
school, and this was like in the 90s or
Hmm.
maybe actually even in the 80s is when her experience was. When certainly we educated kids who are struggling like this a little bit differently. But she wrote memoirs and they read like fiction to me. Like they were
Hmm.
just such rich um stories about
Hmm.
her work with these kids that nobody else knew what to do with. I mean, I remember reading them feeling that she was like magic.
Mm.
And I think I can have some ideas now, 30 years later, thinking about like, why did that spark me?
Yeah.
Um, but back then I didn't have any idea why, I
Yeah.
just knew that it did.
Yeah.
And it really is kind of the path I always was
Okay.
on. When
Yeah.
I finished undergrad, I have a degree in psychology and then moved immediately into graduate school wanting to work with the hardest kids. I
Yeah.
did research in graduate school on kids with you get reactive attachment
Yeah.
disorder.
Mhm.
I was in graduate school when like holding therapy was getting a lot of
Oh, wow.
news coverage.
Yeah.
And so it was this really, I think, kind of unique time
Uh-huh.
period where we were starting to feel like these kids clearly needed something very
Mhm.
different.
Mhm.
And we had no idea what that was.
Yeah.
And in a way, it was kind of an exciting time, I think, to
Mhm.
join the field with
Yeah.
a lot of people who are just trying to be brave and think, how do we help these kids?
Mhm.
Um, and I got really lucky early in my career with some just mentors who also loved these kids.
Mhm.
And it really has been, in many ways, like all I've ever done. I mean, I've dabbled in a couple other things, but I've always come back here to
Yeah.
these kids that left everybody else going, I have no idea what to do and I can't help you.
Right? Yeah. You're like, "Wait, wait, wait. I can.
Yeah. Wait,
Pick
wait, wait.
me."
I don't know how to help you either, but I'm willing to try.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and maybe you can relate to this. And like, that's actually all parents even want.
Yeah.
Somebody
Somebody to
who's willing to try
Yep.
and to be
Yeah.
honest and say, like, I have no idea what to do either,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
willing to try.
But I'm here with you.
Yep.
Yeah. So one of my most favorite quotes that you
Mhm.
said was regulated, connected children who feel safe and know what to do behave well.
Yeah.
So where, for the parents listening or, caregivers who are listening to this
Mhm.
episode, where do they start?
Mm. Yeah. Good question.
Mhm.
Where do they start? I do. I don't know if this is where they start, but I think there comes a point in parenting kids with such intensity that we have this moment with ourselves where for most people we realize like everything we thought we knew about behavior is actually completely wrong.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't wrong, it would have worked by now.
Right?
Like I
Yeah.
would have felt some level of success
Mhm.
in what we knew about behavior. And I think with kids who don't have a lot of vulnerability in their nervous system, whether that be from trauma or toxic stress or, neuroimmune disorders or sensory sensitivity or just neurodivergence, whatever.
Mhm.
And I think with kids without that level of vulnerability in their nervous system, they're just kind of a little hardier in their nervous
Mhm.
system. And so what we learned about behavior and how to help kids worked because a lot of things would work with those
Mhm.
kids. But once I, really got in the trenches and was like day in, day out with these kids and realizing like, I don't know what to do. Their parents don't know what to do. There's professionals. Nobody knows what to do with
Yeah.
these kids. And what that sparked in me was we don't really understand what the real problem is. Like if we
Mhm.
understood what the real problem was, we would have better ideas about how to help them.
Sure.
So again, I don't think a lot necessarily parents start there, but I think that's kind of where they start the moment where they're like, well, nothing else has worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess that sort of opens me up to being willing to consider things that I never did before.
Mhm.
And for me, that is like that's at the crux of regulated, connected kids who feel safe and also know what to do, behave well. That's not what I learned about human behavior. Like I
Right.
learned that people were bad until we punished them enough
Yep.
that they acted good instead.
Right.
And that we had to do that in
Yeah.
order to like coexist
Yeah.
as a social species.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually isn't true at all.
No.
Nope. And I
Far
think
from
the
it.
kids who are teaching us this are these
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. That it's about
Yeah.
mutual respect, that it's about they are humans. They are
Yeah.
not, like less than any of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're really hurting,
Uh-huh.
really hurting. And
Yeah.
their behaviors are just giving us a little peek into
Mm-hmm.
what's, hard, what's really hard for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the place to start, is this willingness to get really curious, not just about like trauma informed parenting or how do I parent kids with history of trauma, but actually how do I challenge the beliefs I've always had about what it means to be human? And
Yeah.
also for like ourselves as parents,
Mm-hmm.
right? The beliefs about like my own behavior and
Mm-hmm.
where it comes from. Because if we really unpack all of it, what we understand in this relatively new, it's about 20 years old field of the relational neurosciences,
Yeah.
what it means to be what I say, like relationally, socially, and behaviorally human. What we see is actually humans are amazing
Mm-hmm.
when they're regulated, when
Yeah.
they're connected to themselves and each other, and when they're experiencing felt safety. Like the behaviors we want to see emerge from that place.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm with a kid who's acting in a way that just makes me want to push connection away,
Yeah.
right? Like the kids who are like, I don't want to be anywhere near you.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly your behavior is making it seem like you don't want
Yeah.
to be anywhere near me,
Right.
right? And that's all very real. And we get to have our very real, authentic feelings about that. But then if in the next moment we can go, gosh, what's up with that? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Because as a human species, we're absolutely designed to be in connection. Our brains develop and thrive in connection, like literally.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make any sense for our kids to behave in a way that's pushing away connection.
Yeah.
And if I can remember that, then I can stay super curious and
Yeah.
really go like, so what's up with that?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a human nature for us to like, okay, here's this behavior. Let's figure out, how to fix this behavior. Let's fix it.
Totally.
Let's fix it,
Yep.
fix it. Right.
Yeah.
But I love how you talk about the brain and the watchdog brain, the possum brain. And I
Yeah.
feel like that plays into, even if we could slow down and look at that piece and
Mhm.
not be so like fix the behavior, but wait,
Yeah.
take a step back and let's look at, can you talk about the brain?
Yeah.
Because I just think you explain it so well and it just makes sense. And I would love
Mhm.
for our listeners to hear that.
Yeah. So I help. Well, again, my background's as a play therapist. So for
Mhm.
years and years and years, I was on the floor with kids in my office who have been, without question, like my biggest teachers.
Mhm.
And feel, yes, in so many ways, they've taught me
Yep.
lots of things.
Right.
How to clean pee out of the
Yes.
couch and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
Getting spit, what I do when I'm spit on
Right.
and all that stuff. Yes. And there's a lot of research that shows it's really helpful for humans to have some sort of like understanding or way to kind of conceptualize themselves
Mhm.
and other people. And so I learned how to teach about the brain through like how to teach kids about
Mhm.
their brain and their own mental processes. And um, that helps with a lot of things. One things that helps with is to remove some of the shame from their
Yeah.
behaviors and also to make it feel as though they have some ability to have power over their behaviors, right?
Mhm.
Like if you don't understand what's happening for you and what your behaviors are, there's this sense of like, well, I'm just sort of at the mercy or at the whim of these behaviors. I feel totally out of control in my
Yeah.
own body. Well, that doesn't feel like a very empowered place to come from as far as like, how could I do something different then?
Right. Mhm.
And so, if you can teach little kids about the brain, you can
Yeah.
teach grown-ups about the brain.
That's right.
Yes. And so very overly simplistic way to
Uh-huh.
teach about the brain is I teach kids and then their grown-ups about their owl brain and then their watchdog and their possum brain. And their owl brain is not just their thinking brain. That's
Mhm.
a common kind of misconception that I need my thinking brain, my owl brain at school to do math. And
Mm.
absolutely you do. But
Yeah.
also you need your owl brain to share your toys with your friends
Mm.
or to talk about your feelings and to know what's happening inside your own
Mhm.
body and to ask for help. And so the owl brain is, yes, the thinking brain, but it's this the owl brain is also where we have social connections and engagement
Mhm.
with one another. And
Yeah.
so when we're in our quote unquote owl brain, that's when we can expect behaviors that are inviting of connection to emerge.
Okay.
So obviously, a lot of the parents that I work with have kids who don't spend a whole lot of time in their owl
In their
brains.
brain. Yeah.
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 Same with the grown-ups, right? When you
Mhm.
live with kids who are hardly ever in their owl brain, it's real hard
It
for
is.
us as grown-ups to stay in our owl brain
Yes.
too, right?
Yes. Accurate.
Yes. And the beauty of this is exactly what's happening right now is that we're laughing about it
Yeah.
instead of judging
Sure.
ea
Yeah.
each other, ourselves, because the parents that I work with, and I'm sure you too, are behaving in ways that they're shocked by
Yeah.
and ashamed of,
Yeah.
like, "I
Oh,
can't
absolutely.
imagine."
Mhm.
So, I say, "Well, if the owl brain is about, connection, it sounds like that behavior, whether we're talking about the parents or their kids' behavior, is not coming from the owl brain." And they say,
Yeah.
"Well, yeah, that makes perfect sense." It's like, "Okay, so let me tell you about these 2 other brains or pathways." I use those words sort of interchangeably, and
Okay.
that there's this also, watchdog pathway and the possum pathway. And the owl brain emerges when the nervous system is in what call connection mode, when there's felt
Okay.
safety,
Yep.
when there's more truly like the balance, there's more cues of safety than there are cues of danger, and our nervous
Mhm.
system feels safe. We we rest into connection mode. Connection mode's actually our default. It's where we want to be.
Mhm.
So when we're experiencing felt safety, it's like our nervous system has this almost like safe permission to just like
Mhm.
go
Ah,
home,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like that's where I want to be. This is a place that feels best for me.
Yeah.
And I like to remember that because the kids that you and I know, they don't seem like they want to be in connection.
Right.
It seems like they're doing everything in their power to avoid it.
Yep. Yep.
And while I know that's true, like that's a very true experience for us as the adults that they don't want to be in connection. I feel like I can show up and keep doing my job every single day when I remember that yes, they're behaving as though they don't want to be in connection, but also there's a part of them that's desperate
Mhm.
to like rest into
Mm.
the safety of connection.
Mhm.
And that feels like a vital part of kind of what keeps me going. I don't know how I could keep doing this job
Yeah.
like day after day if I didn't like hold that core truth.
Yeah.
When the nervous system's experiencing more cues of danger and realizing like, oh, something's not so safe here, it shifts into protection mode.
Yeah.
And in the protection mode, there's these 2 pathways, the watchdog pathway and the possum pathway, which all sounds maybe kind of silly and made up, but it's all based on science.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I just had kids help me,
Yeah.
put it into language that
That makes sense.
yes,
Honestly.
I know. And it is so
Yeah.
beautiful that like if a 7-year-old created it,
Yeah.
then of course the grown-ups can understand it too.
Yeah.
So I've just been so lucky in that way to kind of to have the privilege of listening to these kids for so
Mhm.
long, to be able to take what they're telling me
Mhm.
and then offer it to all the other grown-ups who just don't have as much, kind of privilege as I
Yeah.
do to listen in these capacities. So the watchdog pathway is from a science perspective, like sympathetic activation when we get more energy and activation in our body and we're also not feeling safe.
Yeah.
And so behaviors on the watchdog pathway are going to have energy and intensity to them. So I'm a real big believer in we can look at behaviors as cues and clues, but what we really want to feel into is the energy underneath them.
Mhm.
And, watchdog pathway behaviors have intensity. There's energy, there's
Yeah.
activation there. We see it in kids in their arms and in their legs and their eyes and their
Yeah.
face, right? Like,
Mhm.
lots of protective, could I run away? Could I
Yeah.
fight
Yeah.
kind of energy. And it can be as mild as some mild opposition is already starting down the watchdog pathway. It's a protective behavior,
Mhm.
all the way, of course, to like physical
Mhm.
aggression.
Mhm.
And then on the possum pathway are these more collapsed and shut down behaviors. Kids that look like they're in la la land,
Mm.
they're moving into dissociation.
Mm. Mhm.
Parents tell me, like, I feel like they're not even there. Like I could,
Yeah.
I clap my hands over to their face and they'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Takes them 40
Yeah.
minutes to put their shoes on. That's not
Mhm.
because they're like wandering around the house. They're like literally just sitting there
Mhm.
looking at their shoes
Yeah.
for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And what's so beautiful about this model is it's true about all humans. We all have an owl and a watchdog and a
Uh-huh.
possum. But
Yeah.
our kids, because of their early life experiences, have really sensitive stress response systems. So they get like
Mhm.
big watchdog behaviors to teeny tiny problems, right? Like
Mhm.
dinner's
Yeah.
in 5 minutes instead of right now.
Yeah.
And the watchdog brain reacts like I'm dying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Really, like
Yeah.
throwing, hitting, screaming,
Uh-huh.
punching. Those are I think I'm about to die behaviors.
Mhm.
And there was a stressor. The stressor was you don't get to have what you want at this exact second. And that's a real stressor that warrants a real stress response like, "Oh, bummer."
Yeah. Yeah.
But the stress response is so sensitive that instead of like a congruent stress response, it becomes,
Much
I think
bigger.
my life is in danger.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it happens on both ends of, on both pathways that we can have really big possum responses to very small, objectively speaking, very small
Yeah.
problems as well. And then when we add in the way that kids with histories of relational trauma, what I say is they've had like their connection pathway and their protection pathway like tied together
Kinda yeah. Yeah.
in a way that's yucky
Mhm.
and actually really sad
Mhm.
because our connection pathway is supposed to be the pathway of safety
Safe. Yep.
and and it's just like at the core of our humanity, right?
Mhm.
Like the capacity to be safe inside like intimate human connection is like
Mhm.
one of the things that makes us human. But kids with a history of relational and attachment trauma, what they've learned is that actually connection is terrifyingly
Right.
dangerous.
Right.
Yet
Yeah.
they're still desperate for it. Like there's
Right.
still that part of their nervous system that
That
knows I need connection.
yep.
Yet this thing that my body thinks I need actually feels like it could kill me.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And the bizarre behaviors, like when parents tell me about behaviors that they would call like bizarre or baffling, or they use words like just doesn't make any sense. Like you just sit there
Mhm.
and you look at this kid and you're like, what on earth?
Yeah.
A lot of times those are behaviors where the connection and protection circuitry have been tied together. It's
Mhm.
causing this very confusing behavior because the internalized experience of it is extremely confusing and it feels like
Mhm.
there's no way out. Like there's no solution to that
Yeah.
problem.
So when we understand the brain in that way,
Mhm.
and then we see these big behaviors, these baffling behaviors,
Yeah.
what do parents do then?
Mhm. Great question. Believe it or not, and I know that it doesn't feel like it, and I also know it isn't enough, but shifting the way you see the behavior
Mhm.
actually is a tool.
Okay.
In most ways, I actually think it's the most important parenting tool. And so what I'll often say is changing how we see people changes people.
Okay, yeah.
And if I see this behavior as a protective response that even though I'm very confused by it, I can trust it makes sense in that child's nervous system based on their own history.
Yeah.
Again, I've not yet told you like what to do about it,
Yeah.
but two important things do change. And one is how I experience that behavior. Like
Mhm.
I'm a little less freaked out by it. I'm a little less panicking
Mhm.
about it. Um, I'm able to stay a little more regulated myself,
Mhm.
when I see behavior for what it really is and what we understand about like relational neuroscience and the brain and how all that kind of stuff works. Our kids change how they see themselves.
Mm.
We come to know who we are through like the eyes of the other. The way
Yeah.
people look at us tells us information about who we are.
Mhm.
And so if I can be with somebody who sees me as somebody who's without question got a really, really bad behavior that does indeed need to change.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm not a bad kid,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm a
That's
really
yep.
struggling child.
Mhm.
Like if I can be with somebody who looks at me in that way, eventually I start to believe that about myself.
Mhm.
And we behave in ways that match other people's expectations of us.
Yeah.
Eventually, this will, it takes a long
Over
time for
time.
this to
Yeah.
shift,
Mhm.
but if I think I'm a bad kid who's just bad at my core, and I've
Mhm.
learned that, maybe nobody's taught me that overtly, but man, people are always really frustrated with me, or it seems like
Mm.
everywhere I go, like trouble ensues, right? Like kids are supposed to be super egocentric. They think that they're the cause of
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
So they learn, like, well, the only explanation here is that I'm a very bad kid.
Mhm.
When you think you're a very bad person, ultimately you tend to act in ways that aren't so
Sure.
good.
Yeah.
But if you can start to believe you're a struggling person who happens to have, who's happens to have some really struggling behaviors, but is a at their core, just
Mhm.
this precious, wonderful human, the same
Yeah.
as everyone else, that really actually does start to shift behavior.
Mhm.
So even though it doesn't seem like it's a tool, and I know for sure it's not enough, right? The parents who are coming to us for help are like,
Yeah.
no, 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 but I need you to tell me what to
Yeah.
actually do.
I know.
But I always start there.
Yeah.
And then I help them, help parents really get to know their child's owl, watchdog, and possum brain. And we talk
Yeah.
about ways to grow the owl
The
brain
owl brain. Mhm.
because the kinds of behaviors parents tell me they want out of their kids. They want them to be cooperative. They want them
Yeah.
to be respectful. They want them to be polite. They want them to not overturn the table when dinner's 5 minutes late. They
Yes.
want them not to pee in the closet.
Right.
All these things
Yeah.
that we want our kids to do.
Yeah.
Owl brain behaviors.
Yeah.
Like owl
Yeah.
brains don't pee down your HVAC vents,
Right?
right? Promise.
Yep. Yep.
And so I
So
really,
understanding how that
yeah,
looks in their kids.
yes, yes,
Yes. Okay.
yes. Yep. So really personalize it, and I have the
Yeah.
luxury of really getting to work with parents and the professionals I train, then they get to really personalize it with parents about like, let's take all this theory and make it mean something in your real life with your
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
Right. But what it all comes down to, you really want to grow your kid's owl brain and you really want to help calm their watchdog and possum pathways. Like
Mhm.
we all need our watchdog and possum pathways. And they're
Yeah.
vital parts of being human. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with your child's watchdog brain. We need it, but it's super overworked. Like
Yeah.
your child's watchdog brain is out of control. It
Yeah.
is working way too hard. And
Let's
when
put that
I'll
watchdog in the backyard for now.
and let them
Right?
play.
Yeah.
That's what it's like, we want the watchdog to be here. They're so
Uh-huh.
important,
Uh-huh.
but watchdogs need time to rest
Mhm.
and play. And the truth is that we all make more mistakes when we're tired. And
Mhm.
man, I'll say like your kid's watchdog brain is so tired
Mhm.
and it's righteously tired. Like
Mhm.
it's working so hard now and it worked so hard for your kids before.
Mhm.
And they really needed
Yeah.
their watchdog brain or their possum brain to keep them safe. And it's just really overworked and really overtired. And so I help parents decode where their child is on those pathways. Because if your
Sure.
child's just kind of just slightly on the Watchdog pathway, there's some tools and interventions that will help keep their owl brain around.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they're very far down the Watchdog pathway and they're kicking and hitting and
Yeah.
screaming and cussing, there's other things. There's other tools that are helpful to help bring some
Very good.
safety to
Mm-hmm.
the Watchdog brain. And then what I say is so that the owl can feel safe enough to return. Because
Yeah.
their owl brain is flown away. Like the Watchdog is freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
The owl is scared. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I'm
Yeah.
out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, right, and in my own parenting too, and in my own humaning, like with all people I know, like when I start to get stressed or scared because of other people's bad behavior, I get really wordy, right? Like I start to use like a lot of words.
Mm-hmm.
And I trying really hard to get the other person to like just be reasonable or
Mm-hmm.
see things my way or
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you would just, right? Like we start
Mm-hmm.
to think we can sort of muscle almost the owl brain back. But
Yeah.
what I help parents see is like, oh, no, 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 the owl brain is totally gone. So we're
Yeah.
actually not going to be logical at all. We're not going to think about consequences. We're not going to think about anything except bringing safety and connection to the super scared watchdog or
Yeah.
possum.
Yeah.
Once we have them feeling safe and calm and the owl brain is back,
Then,
that's when
yeah.
we can teach, set different kinds of boundaries, help,
Mm-hmm.
kids make more sense of their behavior, think about things like cause and effect.
Yeah.
We just have to wait till the owl brain comes back.
Yeah.
So I teach parents so many tools,
Yeah.
but really more than that. I mean, most of the parents I know, and I bet you feel the same way, like they have a lot of tools. And tools
Yeah.
really aren't that hard to find.
Right. Yeah.
But we don't really know when or where or why
Sure.
we're using them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense. So, what about consequences? I feel like that's
Mm.
almost every family that I work with is like, but what about the consequence? What about, so like, what do you say
Love
to
it.
that?
Well, I have a podcast episode called But What About a Consequence?
Yeah. I listened to it. I loved it.
and,
Yep.
and in
I
my
will put
parent
that in the show
course,
notes.
yes, in the parent course that I have created and I train other people to teach, that is one of the module. Well, actually, the module is called What Do We Do when the Owl Brain Returns?
Okay.
AKA, but what about a
The
consequence?
consequence. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Because that's what everybody's asking. And so the first thing I have to do is say, tell me what you mean by the word consequence.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people actually do mean punishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes sense
Yeah.
because that's what we think changes
That's
behavior.
right. That's what we know. That's how we were
Yeah.
raised. Yeah.
Yeah. And we think that if we talk about different kinds of punishments like timeout,
Mm-hmm.
if we call it a consequence, it's not a punishment. But no, it's actually still a punishment.
Yep.
It
Yep.
is. And
Yeah.
that I'm no judgment about that. I'm a
Yeah.
parent and occasionally I toss out punishments too because sometimes we just don't know what else to do. We
We're
go
at a
down our
loss.
watchdog
Yeah.
pathway.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And when we go down our watchdog pathway, we resort one to what we learned a long time ago, and two,
Yep.
we resort to control.
Yeah.
All of us do. All humans
Mm-hmm.
get controlling. So that's the first step is like, let's really talk about what you mean by consequence. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you mean punishment, now we have to go back to, but regulated, connected kids who feel safe do well.
Yeah.
So do we need a punishment?
Right.
Or do we need to help kids be regulated, connected, and feeling safe?
Right. Yeah.
And it's so hard to shift out of the punishment
Yeah.
paradigm. And
Right.
I think the hardest thing actually is our fear of how other people are judging us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are they going to say in the grocery store? What are they going to
Yeah.
say at church?
Right.
Ugh. Yeah. That's like a
Exactly.
whole other layer.
Totally other
Yeah.
layer, but everybody's got that place.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a place that's very important to them for community. So like
Yeah.
church, right?
Yeah.
Like these are people's central places of belonging and community and identity.
Yeah.
And they're real committed to maintaining that, of
Yeah.
course, because as
Yep.
humans, we're a very social species and we want to stay in our in group. And the threat of any sort of like shame around that
Mhm.
causes big, big, big feelings in us. We don't
Mhm.
want to be shamed by the people that we want to be.
In community
r-
with.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Um, so it makes a lot of sense that parents are carrying this extra burden
Mhm.
around, well, I don't want my community to judge me or shame me or blame me for my kids' behaviors. We do have
Mhm.
some outdated and distorted beliefs about behavior, including
Yeah.
that parents are in charge.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we are not in charge of our kids' behavior. We're
Mm-mm.
just not. They're
No.
their own little people.
People. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have that kind of conversation first. Like, let's really get clear about what we mean by punishment and consequence. We don't need a punishment to change behavior. We need to trust that their precious humanness will emerge
Mhm.
when they're regulated and connected and feeling
Feel
safe.
safe. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, if we step away from the word punishment and we think about what a consequence really is, consequence is just the thing that happens next.
Yeah.
So for me, but what about a consequence means, well, the first thing that happens after I've had a major disruption with my child is we have to repair that.
Yeah.
We have to come back into connection with one another. And repair doesn't necessarily mean I'm apologizing for something.
Mhm.
It might. I
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
needed to apologize to
Absolutely.
my kid.
We all do.
But sometimes, you know how in like in our culture we use the words I'm sorry, but what we really mean is I regret. Like I
Yeah.
regret that that
Yeah.
happened to you. You know, like when you say
Uh-huh.
I'm so sorry to hear that your dog died, you're not admitting that you caused the
Yeah.
dog to
Mhm.
die. You're just expressing
Yeah.
your regret. Like it's a way of saying I see you in your pain
Mhm.
and I regret
Oh, I like that.
this.
Yeah. Mhm.
So when I say repair, I'm really meaning that kind
Yeah.
of repair, you know, like expressing to our kids like we saw that that behavior emerged from a place of pain.
Mhm.
And that must have been really hard. It was hard to watch.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you had a big watchdog moment, I had a big watchdog brain moment too.
Mhm.
And I'll bet that was scary for you because watchdogs are scary.
Yeah.
And I'm working so hard to help my watchdog feel safer so that when you have a watchdog moment, my watchdog doesn't feel like it has to, you know, come to the
Yeah.
rescue and get even
Mhm.
scarier. So I'm trying to take care of my watchdog brain too. And we're also working so hard to help you take care of your watchdog brain. I wonder if you have any ideas about how to take care
Mm.
of your watchdog brain.
Yeah.
And obviously this is major oversimplification. These
Totally.
conversations
Yeah.
never go this way.
No, no, no.
No, I know this. But they're just ideas
Yeah.
to get
Yep.
your like,
Yep.
you know, get your brain spinning. Um, so repair, reconnection, and then I ask parents to ask this question, to ask the question, what would I need to do in the future to help my kids' success be inevitable?
Mhm. That's good. Yeah.
And sometimes the answer to that is impossible,
Yeah.
but oftentimes it's not.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I'm dropping my kid off at the mall and they're shoplifting,
Yeah.
or maybe not even doing something that bad, but just causing a
Get an
ruckus.
intro. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, just being inappropriate. Well, what does my kid need for the success to be inevitable? Well, they need a lot more supervision.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, what they really need is a lot more co regulation, right?
Yeah.
But supervision is, you know, offering co regulation. And so
Mhm.
there, for me, it would be like, well, it feels like bringing you to the mall and leaving you in a place that isn't giving you the enough regulation and connection and feel safety you need in order for your owl brain to be in charge
Mhm.
means I need to do something to set you up for better success. So
Mhm.
maybe the next time I'll bring you to the mall and I'll stay at the mall too and I'll walk like 10 steps behind you and your friends.
Right.
You won't
Yeah.
even know I'm there.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like I'll bring my, you know, laptop and I'll sit in the food court So I'll
Mhm.
be in the mall if you need. It just depends on how much
Yeah.
co-regulation kids need in
Yeah.
order for their owl brain to stick around. So there's always this stage of kind of renegotiating what our kids need in order to be successful.
Yeah. Well,
That's
and isn't some of that even looking at ourselves? Like,
oh yeah, for
what
sure.
have I done to potentially make my child's watchdog brain? You know
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean? And
Oh yes.
so taking that step back to say, okay, well, if I wouldn't have, had this unrealistic expectation, or if I wouldn't have said
Yeah.
no about something that I didn't really need to say no about, sometimes it can even be that simple.
Absolutely. Or if I wouldn't have put them in a situation that I knew they probably couldn't be successful in
Yeah.
because both of us are just so longing for them to be able to do the things that
Yes.
other kids can do. Like, I wish I could drop my kid off at the birthday party at Jumpoline,
Mhm.
but like all the other moms do, because wouldn't that be nice?
Right?
But what I know is some other kid's going to get a
Right.
black eye. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to stay.
Yeah.
And so that's not blaming ourselves as parents, but
No.
I know I'm regularly kind of fighting against reality,
Mhm.
like wishing reality wasn't
Mhm.
true,
Yeah.
and really being like, I wish my kid could be successful at this birthday party. So I'm going to drop him off.
Mhm.
And then what we
Knowing
know is going to
that.
happen is what
Yeah.
happens.
That's right.
And sometimes we just have to be so compassionate and kind to ourselves. It's like, of course, we both want that so badly that our
Yeah.
kids can have the kinds of experiences that other kids have and be safe and enjoy those experiences. But the truth is most of our kids need a lot more
Mhm.
scaffolding. They need a lot more
Yeah.
co-regulation. They need a lot more like it's like you wouldn't drop a toddler off at the
Right.
Jumpoline park.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that,
Totally.
even
Yep.
though they're 10 or 12. So yeah, I think absolutely looking at those types of things in us and also looking at our expectations.
Mhm.
When my kid's struggling, if I'm in my owl brain, one of the first questions I'll ask myself is, how are me and him right now?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I work a lot. I'm a full-time working mom. I own my own
Mhm.
business. My husband's a stay-at-home parent. And so sometimes I just have to be really honest with myself. It's like, well, part of what's happening here is a result of like the disconnection
Yeah. Not
that's
being fully
happening.
present. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
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 That's good. Um, so tell us about your book then, because you are I could just have you keep talking about all the things. You just make things so simple and so easy to understand. And like I can go upstairs right now and just be the best mom ever. And, I've got it now because I talked to Robin.
That's the
So
best thing for me to hear, because if there's anything I wanna do to help parents, it is to bring them that feeling,
yeah,
which is honestly what that is reconnecting with their real selves.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
"I can do this. I'm a good parent."
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
because you are.
Right.
So, if my work is helping people feel like, "I've got this,"
Oh
like,
yeah,
mm,
absolutely.
I love that.
So I'm excited for your book. I've already
Mhm.
pre-ordered it because I think
Oh,
I
thank
pre-ordered it
you.
the day that it said you could pre-order.
Thank
So it's like
you.
sitting in my Amazon cart. Like, I'm gonna have to stare at that
Yeah, yeah,
until
yeah.
and
For months and months because it has
yeah.
unfortunately been delayed. We were hoping it would publish in April, but it has been like all things, nothing goes according to plan. And
Yeah.
so it's scheduled to come out at this point on September 21st. It's called
Okay.
Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, Brain Body Sensory
Mm,
Strategies That Really Work, which is a lot of words. It's a very long
it's
title.
fine. It's okay. It's all necessary.
It's just a lot. And so in some ways my book is kind of like the conversation we just had.
Mhm.
Um the one of the things that I'm hoping is different about this from another parenting book, because they're all so wonderful, is that instead of having a lot of like examples or what we would call like vignettes,
Yeah.
like stories about
Mhm.
Mark and their mom and these little paragraphs. I have some of those, but what is a little different about my book is that every chapter begins with a parent in my office, and it reads a lot like a fiction
Okay.
story, and it's the same parent. So that we get to know
Oh,
Nat,
okay.
who comes to
Love
parent
that.
coaching
Okay.
for her kiddo with a very vulnerable nervous system.
Mhm.
And so my hope in that, because I read it in first person, like I
Okay.
talk about me as the therapist or the parent
Mhm.
coach, and the reader then gets a lot of my own inner dialogue
Mhm.
about like what I'm doing and why I'm doing it with this parent, and
Mhm.
subsequently, helping her with her kid. What I'm hoping is conveyed in that more than anything is how much I adore this parent,
Mm. Mm.
because that really is almost the most important thing that parents get when they work with
Yeah.
me, is how much I
Yeah.
adore them.
Mhm.
And I thought long and hard about, how do I bring that little piece of magic to more parents? Like, how do I get that outside the therapy
Mhm.
office? Because that's just not enough. I can't see enough
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And so the reader gets to know Nat and her
Yeah.
very real feelings
Mhm.
about parenting her kiddo who's really struggling.
Mm.
And the reader gets to feel how much I adore her and how we are just there together, me
Mm.
and her. Like
Mhm.
I'm not going anywhere. And my
Mm.
hope is that the reader really kind of starts to feel
Feel that.
like that themselves.
Yeah.
Because that's what changes the brain. That's when I sat down to write this book, I was like, I know how the brain changes relationally in human connection.
Yeah.
How could I possibly do that in a book?
In a book. Yeah.
Yeah. So I gave it my best shot. That's the kind of
Yeah.
conclusion I came up with, was like,
Okay.
I want the reader to feel like I'm talking to them.
Yeah.
So every chapter starts that way, in
Okay.
this conversation between me and Nat.
Mhm.
And then the rest of the chapter goes on to read like a nonfiction parenting book that you'd expect, right? With
Yeah.
tools and techniques and theory and ideas. And we, the first part of the book is all about regulation, connection, and felt safety.
Yay.
And then we go through
That's
the
so good.
Watchdog and the Possum and the Owl Brain,
Cool.
and I
Yay.
load the reader up with tools. There's going to be some downloadables so people can get some like
Oh,
printouts
awesome.
and handouts. Yep.
Yeah.
And then the third part of the book is where Nat, my person who's working with me, gets safe enough to start to do some work around herself
Oh,
and her
so
own
cool.
nervous system and
Mhm.
her own very righteous triggers that are
Mhm.
arising in the face
Mhm.
of her child's very out of control behavior.
Mhm.
But then, she really gets to be tended to for what's happening in
Mm.
her nervous system. And
Mm.
which is really kind of the three parts of how I work with parents. Like first we
Yeah.
learn the science, then we learn the tools, and then we learn about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to try to offer that in a book form.
Yeah.
We'll see what
I
happens.
love it. Yeah. So where can people find your book?
So you can go to robyngobbel.com slash
Okay.
baffling book.
Okay.
And that will give you links to pre-order in different places. Of course, you could do like Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I've actually connected with a local bookstore here in Grand Rapids who
Mhm.
ships all over the country and even worldwide. And if you pre-order through them, you'll get a signed copy. I'm going to go
That's so
in. I'm going to
cool.
go into the bookstore before they ship them out and sign
I
them.
love
Isn't that
that.
fun? I
That's really
know.
cool. Yay. So
Yeah.
where can people find you then if they
Yes.
want to learn more about you?
So I'm at robyngobbel.com, and I have a podcast and I have lots of free things available
Mhm.
on my website. I have an online membership community for parents, and then the training program for
Yeah.
professionals.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, before we say goodbye, I just have one question for you that I ask all of my
Yes.
guests. What would be 3 resources that you would recommend to families who are either starting their healing journey or in the midst of healing?
The first resource that comes to mind for me is my very dear friend Marty Smith's
Oh,
book. Do you know who
yeah.
Marty Smith is?
Yes, I love that book.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Marty's book, The Connected Therapist,
Yeah.
is just a gem,
Mhm.
and it's super unique. And what she's talking about, how she's an occupational therapist, and so
Mhm.
she's really looking at kids' behaviors through the lens of their bodies and their
Yeah.
sensory systems. And it is a piece that I think is really easy to overlook
Oh, yeah.
when we're, really in the trenches with out of
Mhm.
control behavior. So Marty's book is so readable and like packed with
So much
practical,
good. Yeah. Yeah.
tangible goodness.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
A resource I send people to all the time is Beacon House. Do you know
Okay.
Beacon House?
No.
They have brilliant downloads, handouts, short videos that talk about developmental trauma.
Okay.
And it's a lot of like Dr. Perry's work
Okay.
and other like Dr. Siegel's work and, Tina Payne Bryson's work, like all these
Yeah.
folks. And same kind of theory. They're very much relational neuroscience. And then they have obviously somebody brilliant that works for them who can
Yeah.
create amazing like one pagers and
That's awesome.
infographics that are really helpful for us
Okay.
as families, but also to give to other people.
Yeah.
Right? People who want to try to help our kids, but they can't sit down and write a whole book
Yeah.
about it.
Okay.
And what's the third resource that I'm giving out all the time? Oh, another resource I give out probably more than almost anything is Dr. Katja Rowell's work.
Okay.
And she is a responsive feeding specialist. She's a pediatrician,
Okay.
and she has written the book Love Me, Feed Me,
Okay.
and is actually specifically for adoptive parents, but
Oh,
all families with
okay.
kids with vulnerable nervous systems would benefit. But it sure is nice to read a book that feels like it's just for you, you know?
Yeah.
So
Oh,
nice.
absolutely. Yeah.
And Dr. Rowell gets the science of felt safety in a way that I don't know if I've ever heard another doctor talk about it. And
Okay.
her emphasis on relationship and felt safety inside the extremely sticky topic of food and feeding.
Oh, yeah.
And she talks both about kids with like extreme picky eating who like won't eat
Mhm.
anything,
Anything.
as
Mhm.
well as the other end of the spectrum, and the language she uses is food preoccupation,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
and how to help families with kids, regardless of kind of
Yeah.
where they are. But really, like her emphasis on felt safety is like nothing I've ever seen in that specific field. So,
Yeah. Okay.
Love Me, Feed Me is the
Okay.
name of that book.
I'm
Yep.
going to put all of those in the show notes. So thank you for
Perfect.
that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was so much fun. I feel like I just sat here during a parent coaching session. So thank you for teaching me all your knowledge.
Well, you are so welcome. It
You're
is, I mean, I think
amazing.
the loveliest thing about podcasting is this way we get to be relational with each other, and then
Yeah.
other people get to listen
I know.
and they get to learn themselves in this very
Yeah.
relational way. It's so wonderful. So thank you for
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
doing and this
Oh, of
resource you
course.
have for families.
Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah, I know, isn't it?
Okay, well, stay warm on this winter day that it's not winter, but it's
It
winter.
is. It is winter.
It's cold where
So
I am too, so it's
yeah,
fine. I'm over it.
exactly. And
Anyway,
gray.
yeah, yeah, same.
Thank
Okay,
you.
well, have a good day.